We're getting into the season where slow cooker squash soup is on my mind and on my menu almost weekly. It's super simple because you can put everything into a slow cooker. We blend it together to make a delicious bowl of soup. I saute a few apples to add as a garnish because it's fall and you want to enjoy all those flavors. So let's make a big batch of this so I can eat on it, but you can too. Let's go. We're getting into the time of year that I really look forward to, and it's soup season, especially when we start talking about squash and all the squash that are coming in from the garden or at the farmer's market, at the grocery store, and how we can use them in delicious, nourishing soups that really are just fulfilling. They're great for lunches, they're great for dinners. They're also just really comforting, warm, and cozy, and that's what this is all about. Now, I did not grow up with squash soup. I grew up in the Midwest, in Southeast Iowa, and we didn't necessarily used to grow lots of squash. We maybe had an occasional butternut squash, but then as I started growing my own food, as I started learning more, we now grow so many more beautiful squash, and I use them all somewhat in different ways, but sometimes the same. So today we're making a squash soup with winter squash. That means you can very easily use just a butternut squash, one of the most classic, easy to find. It has a really beautiful sweet flesh. I also love to vary it and use personally two of my favorites, which is kabocha or buttercup. Both of them, they look very similar. They have slight differences in how they're grown, but they both have a very dense, sweet flesh. They're harder to peel. Sometimes it can be easier to roast them first, but if you're not comfortable with it, just use a butternut because it's more thin-skinned and easy to peel. Today I am using a buttercup, one of my favorites. And what I'm doing, you can see, is getting it ready so I can just chop it up into pieces. So I cut it in half, and this one is thicker skinned. That means it has a very heavy skin around it. Obviously it has the stem here on top. What I like to start by doing is taking out any of those seeds and that pith. We don't want that. Now, what you can do is just go around and easily, now I use a grapefruit spoon because I think it's more easier. It has those little teeth that get in there, and then you can see it just very easily grabs all of that. Now you can roast these. You could save the seeds and plant them for next year. You can do any of that. Roasting them is very delicious, but it's whatever kind of works for you. And then what we're gonna do is just make sure we get some of that pith too, because that isn't really fun to eat. Now, like I said, if this looks cumbersome, do a butternut squash. You can actually even sometimes just leave the peel on it and it will blend in. So what I'm gonna take is a heavy duty vegetable peeler and just start taking off that skin, which you can see you wanna take off enough so you start getting to the brighter color underneath, not that green, because you don't wanna eat the green. But then once we get all that exposed, we're left with the beautiful interior. It's so simple. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna chop this up into pieces. Now, this is I didn't even mention my favorite part. This is a slow cooker squash soup. You know what that means? You can get this ready before work. You can get this ready in the morning. You could even get this ready for a tailgate, for a party. Let it sit in the slow cooker and it's gonna do the work for you. So I'm gonna make sure we go through how you add more flavor, because when something sits in a slow cooker, it kind of loses flavor. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna chop this up into pieces. We're gonna start putting everything together. I'm gonna get the other one peeled and then we'll keep going. I'm finishing up with the squash. I cut them in 1/2 inch to 1 inch cubes. It's nothing perfect because this is a slow cooker, but also we're gonna blend it. Squash soup can be so good when it's blended and smooth and get the right beautiful texture. Now, you're gonna see it's not perfectly sized. That's okay. And the other thing to remember, squash soup is the most forgiving. So obviously when you buy a squash, they're all gonna be different sizes, way different amounts. So while the recipe is for a certain amount of pounds of squash, if you're slightly over, you can adjust. You can add a little bit more stock to thin it out how you need. You can make it work perfectly, but don't waste the squash. I would use the whole squash. So now we're gonna also add some other flavors. Obviously we need some onion. Now again, you're gonna notice with this, I'm not cutting it perfectly. I'm going to give it a very rough chop because this is just gonna cook together and then blend. So I'm not worried about the size of everything. I'm more just wanting to make sure it all gets added. So I'm just going through, giving it a rough chop. Now, this is one of those things where we're blending sweetness with other flavors, and that's what's really important. So to balance all of those, an apple does such a good job, especially with squash soup. And what I like is, apples are thin-skinned. We eat the peel. If you are someone that doesn't eat the peel, no. Has good fiber in it. But what we are gonna do is leave the peel on because it's gonna blend in to a point that you don't know after it cooks. I am just gonna take out that core, obviously, in the center. So I just wanna take that out. You can also, if you don't feel comfortable, because this is unsafe practices. You're in my kitchen, and I don't always do things perfectly. I'm not a trained chef. I'm an at-home cook. Don't do that with a big knife. You should probably go like this, where you take it, put it on the board, and at an angle, cut out the center core very easily like that. Do what feels safe to you, because the thing when it comes to knife skills, working with a knife, you want it to be comfortable and you want to feel confident in what you're doing. But you can see just a rough chop again on the apple. Nothing perfect, that's the point. Now, I like to use any apple for this is gonna work. I'm using right now what's coming out of my orchard, because that's what I want to use. But something like a Braeburn, something like a Gala or a Gala, those are all gonna work well for just a simple kind of nice balance of sweet and tart. That's what you want in the apple. Now with that, we're gonna make sure that we have very simply carrot and celery. Again, nothing perfect, just a nice rough chop. Both of these are gonna give kind of that vegetal flavor. Think of a mirepoix, like when you start something with diced onion, celery, carrot, and all that just works together. It's the same idea here. So we're putting those right in there. And then I wanna get ready some fresh ginger. Now, the reason we're trying right here to make sure we have strong flavors is because when something cooks, like this is going to, in a slow cooker for quite a while, it loses flavor, so flavors weaken. So what I wanna do is peel some ginger, and ginger, fresh ginger especially, has a nice pungency, and that really does get tempered in this long cooking. So unlike just dried ginger, ground ginger that you use a lot of times in baking, the fresh has such more of an aromatic quality. So I'm gonna finish here just peeling it, and then we're gonna grate it right into the soup. Now I'm just grating that peeled ginger in with just a little grater that's gonna get it nice and fine. Unlike other things when you blend them, ginger does not blend as well. So I don't wanna put the whole thing in. I wanna make sure it's grated so when we blend it, it's non-existent, but we're gonna get all the pungency of that flavor. And ginger works really well with everything else we're putting in, which is super important. It has that nice strength that will really cut through the soup. So when you get it on the grater, it kind of sticks to it. Make sure you tap it off because you want to get all that off of there. So one of the last things I want is some garlic. And to do that, I'm not going to worry too much about anything other than getting it out of its husk. So I'm going to take and get that root end off, just nice clean cut of a couple cloves. I like to put a lot of garlic in this because again, when you're cooking something for a long time like we are, guess what? You need to. Now those two fell out somehow really beautifully and easily. When they don't, I just like to take a knife on the side, just give it a couple whacks on the back. Then that bruises the garlic enough that you can just get the peel right off. Do you see how it just then falls off? You want them to be smashed, they release, and just let everything go in. So finally what we're gonna add are some spices. And I have a blend, not a blend, but I put them in here. Cinnamon, ground curry, a yellow ground curry, and some black pepper. This to me smells like fall, and also like the best kitchen store you could go into. I love the mixture. And we're putting these in because we want them to be very aromatic and really just meld together with that sweetness and the tartness of everything that's going in. And then to finish it off, of course, some chicken or vegetable stock. This can be easily vegetarian. So we're gonna put this in. I have it on high. You can do it for as little as 6 hours. You can also do it for up to like 8, which is wonderful. So we're gonna make sure we cover it. That's the important part. And before I do that, some salt. I always will leave the salt out accidentally, but believe me, you want that in there. You have a lot of sweet, you wanna balance that out. So we're gonna finish up with this. I'm gonna cover it, let it cook. Then we're gonna make a quick topping right before we blend it. The soup has been simmering away. It has just a little bit left. That's what I love about a slow cooker. It smells wonderful in the house. It just sits and cooks all day. It reminds me of home and growing up. So now what I'm doing is a quick, kind of just like extra component, but is really nice to me to do with any type of soup especially. You know, soup is kind of on its own, but when you add a little topping, maybe it can be really good. So what we're gonna do is just really quickly saute some apple and a little bit of maple syrup, add a hint of cinnamon, and this is just gonna be able to sit on top of the soup and just be a nice garnish, which is really not needed, but always welcomed. So what I have here is my apple. We're just gonna add that over here to a skillet I have on low, medium-low heat, maybe a little bit more medium depending on. And what we're gonna do is just let these slowly saute. So I have a little bit of maple syrup just to bring out that sweetness even more, which will be a nice complement to that soup. And then right on top of that, I wanna add just a hint of cinnamon. So it's just that nice warming spice, which will go really well with the soup because it's already in the soup a little bit. So I'm just gonna stir these a little bit until they just begin to soften, and then we'll be done. It just takes a couple minutes, and you can see they just saute, get a little bit of color, but and slightly tender. It's like a crisp tender, and that's what I want. So we're gonna let those cool off. It's just a nice topping. And here we have the soup. Now it looks like nothing right now. Like, it just doesn't look great. Thus why we blend it. But to finish it off, I have two things. A little bit of apple cider vinegar. So anytime you cook something for a long time, something with a little bit of acidity like apple cider vinegar wakes everything up. Not enough to notice, but just enough to make everything sing a little bit better. And then some coconut milk. Now, the reason I'm doing coconut milk is it adds this nice creaminess, a little bit of richness, and it just works really well in it. Again, since we put that ginger in and those warming spices of the curry and the cinnamon, it just works well with it. And I like how it kind of softens it and, I don't know, just brings it together. So now I'm gonna take an immersion blender. You could also do this in batches in a canister blender, whatever works for you. We're gonna blend it till it's smooth. And once it's done, it should just be smooth. Now again, if you don't feel like your immersion blender, or if you don't have one strong enough, you can do it other ways, but this is the best part. See how simple and beautiful that is? Now you can still keep it warm at this point if you wanna go longer and just let it sit in the crock pot. You're not ready for a meal, or you wanna now have people over and just serve right from it, that's fine. But this is when you can just start assembling. Now some people like tons of different toppings. I don't. I think squash soup is simple and beautiful on its own, and it really doesn't need too much other than a beautiful bowl. And look at that color of the soup. This is, to me, what I am so ready for as we get into those cooler evenings. You get those beautiful, just like sunsets, and you want something that just kind of hugs you, and that's what this does. So we have our soup. Now, like I said, I like with it these apples. You could do something else too, but I think they add kind of just like a nice component here. See how they just add a nice beauty to it, but then also we'll have this sweet tartness to go with it too, which I really like. So then you can just serve it up and eat it. And this is my favorite part. That blend of, oh, I wanted to keep eating. That blend of spices with it is what I love. You get the ginger. It's not near as pronounced as you think it is after that long cooking. You get a little bit of the warmth. You don't just pull out cinnamon or curry, but they just work in tandem with that coconut milk to add this nice full flavor to a perfect fall soup. What I love about it is, it's easy. You dump it all together, you blend it at the end, and you're ready to go. That's what a soup should be, especially on those work days, those cold days where you just want something ready to go. So I hope you agree, and I hope you share this video around, because that's gonna help others see how easy it is to make some of your favorite foods that maybe you usually go out to eat, but you can make them at home. While I'm on a farm here in Southeast Iowa, this can be made and replicated anywhere. So check my website, wiseguy.com, for this recipe, share it around, and until next time, enjoy and make some really good food.